He kind of took New York by storm, and he was in all the magazines before he was 25, worldwide.
My philosophy was always that art really could communicate to larger numbers of people instead of the elitist group of people that could afford it and quote-unquote understand it.
90% or more of the people using the subways would never go to Museum of Modern Art.
That was around the time when Keith kind of went, bing, I'm going to do this.
The crawling baby, the dog, flying pyramids, dancing man, turning them into his own vocabulary.
I was realizing the potential of images and how much power they have to speak almost as a language.
Keith had an inherent need to have a dialogue with people.
For me, the art market has very little to do with what art is supposed to be.
I was formally introduced to this painting here yesterday when the brother painted it. We love it because he's all right with us.
The traditional art world didn't get that he felt that art should be as accessible as possible.
It's sort of a romantic idea of being an artist of the people. I just found a way to do it that was very direct.
He was so prolific. I would come back the next day and there would be 4 new paintings and 20 drawings. Okay.
I think it's more important to keep coming up with new images and things that were never made before.
From painting vacant ad spaces in subways to being flown around the world is quite a leap.
I would say, Keith, have some of this carrot juice instead of doing a line of Coke.
Live as fully and as completely as you can and deal with the future as it comes to you.
He was celebrating life up to the very end.
So, this is the 8th day of August, 1989, and I'm speaking with Keith Haring. One of the things I want to ask you is what kind of little boy you were, if you recall.
I had glasses from the time I was in 2nd grade, so I was already sort of a little, nerd. I think I was real insecure about being last to be picked for teams. My mother was really trying to sort of mold me into something, I suppose. The pressure to play Little League or to go play ball. I was really more interested in doing silly creative things like inventing a club or arranging some sort of clubhouse. I was completely obsessed with the monkeys to the point where I would buy teen magazines which were really made for little girls, and I would cut out these pictures of the monkeys, especially Davy Jones, who was the cute young one.
He certainly was the cutest.
Which was one of the first times I think that I began to frighten my parents.
And you were the eldest of how many?
Of 4. Yeah, after me they had a girl, and then after 2 years had another girl, and my 3rd sister was born when I was 12 years old.
Kutztown is a small town, what I would call a very conservative town, in the heart of Pennsylvania Dutch country. Yeah, I call it sleepy because, well, just because it's, there's not much going on. And that definitely was Keith's opinion of it.
Will you please stop?
Bang, 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 bang. I went to church camp every summer.
Did you?
I couldn't have been more than 12 when I did a talent show. And as my part of the talent show, I did a striptease, but as a woman. Typical typical striptease music.
Oh my God.
Out of a cake, which we had made out of cardboard boxes.
But did you actually strip?
Well, no, not to nothing. No, this is church camp. We'd be driving somewhere and we'd see hippies and people hitchhiking and stuff, and I always thought it was really cool. But my parents were, Nixon supporters, and I remember distinctly hearing my mother say things about the Beatles, like how they should have sank the boat on their way over, and how, I mean, they really weren't part of the 60s cultural revolution at all.
Well, but now talk about your dad.
He was interested in ham radio. A lot of times in the beginning, he was doing it with Morse code. The sound was something that was embedded in my head from childhood or whatever.
My father always used to tell me this is Morse code. This is Morse code.
We don't have an exact date on this,
but we're pretty sure it's 3rd grade.
When I grow up, I would like to be an artist in France. The reason is because I like to draw. I would get my money from the pictures I would sell. I hope I will be one. Keith Haring. I mean, he was always drawing in school when he wasn't supposed to be.
He would draw on any kind of paper, backs of store lists, backs of cards. Yeah, he was always open to drawing anything.
And he found a friend in Kermit. They both liked to draw.
We grew up in the same town and 2 blocks away from each other. Our real friendship started, I think, in grade school. And pretty much that's when we started making things together.
We are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama, saying we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Living in this town, my connection to real world events was mostly through Life magazine and on television.
At 7:10 this evening, Martin Luther King was shot.
We delivered newspapers on the same street. We were reading the paper day by day. There was a lot of crappy stuff going on. We were talking about it, and it bothered us.
We will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggression.
Keith, as long as I knew him, was an activist. When Nixon ran for president, we found ourselves running around town with bars of soap, putting stuff about Nixon on buildings. In Kutztown, people didn't write on things that didn't belong to them. Rolling hills and cornfields and horse and buggies and absolutely no graffiti. Keith got interested in that whole Jesus movement. What it illustrated to me was a kind of a longing to be a part of something.
I guess it was around that time I discovered smoking pot for the first time, and that replaced the whole Jesus thing. And loved watching anti-drug things, like when we did this Go Ask Alice thing.
If we had a clue as to where you got the stuff you took in the Larsons.
They're crawling again. They're crawling.
Get the doctor.
Showing you the dangers of drugs, which just made me want to do drugs even more.
Obviously, they are all able to blow pot occasionally without ill effects. Well, almost all of them.
And acid was around a lot. I mean, I'd taken a lot of acid and was going to the concerts and letting my hair get longer and longer. And,
now, did you draw while under the influence?
Yeah.
What do you make of that one, Alan?
The smoking pot, we were pretty well convinced he was doing that.
By this time, I was doing really stupid drugs. Angel dust with my friend who was making it. The older sisters were scared of me at that point, probably. So my littlest sister became my friend.
I was not making judgments of him. I was open to him in a different way. He used to take me places. He used to put me in the stroller and push me across town to go to the public library and read books to me. I would stand on top of the washing machine and I would jump into his arms, and then he would put me back in the washing machine. He'd take a step back and we'd do it again. And we'd see how far away he could get and I could jump to him.
But then I got a job in the Arts and Crafts Center in Pittsburgh. Even though I wasn't a student, I proceeded to use the other facilities around there to do my own work. One of the most important things in Pittsburgh was that Carnegie did the Pierre Alashinsky retrospective, who I had never heard of before, and the work was so close to what I was doing. And it was the first time that I felt that I was doing something that was worth something. And then, having seen my work, this art center asked me if I wanted to have an exhibition. Yeah. So at 20 years old, in 1978, I was having my first show on my own. And at one point, on my way to go to work, I looked down and there was a piece of paper that I just had written on top of it, "God is a dog," right? And I picked it up and turned it over, and the other side said, "Jesus is a monkey." I have no idea why this was like such a profound thing to me, but it triggered a punk attitude. I knew that I had to make a break. I had reached this plateau in Pittsburgh. That day, I cut my hair very short and started going to record stores and buying all these new bands. I knew I had to go to New York because that was the only place where obviously I was going to find the intensity that I wanted to find, both in terms of the art world and in terms of my life. Also, I was realizing little by little that I had to sleep with men. I had looked into schools and found the school which seemed incredibly interesting to me, which was School of Visual Arts.
It worried us that he would be exposed to things that we try to protect children from. And we would have no control over that.
So I checked into the YMCA. I'm there my first night in New York City. So I sort of ventured out. I ended up on Christopher Street and was like a kid in a candy store. It was like gay Disneyland or something. I was completely, mesmerized. And I ended up meeting someone on the pier, going back to his apartment and playing around. And I ended up deciding that I should move in and be his roommate.
New York of the late 70s, when I arrived, when Keith arrived, it was a place a lot of people were afraid to go to. It was downtrodden.
In 1978, it was bankrupt.
Good evening. New York City was on the brink of default for most of the day.
A lot of the buildings were abandoned. It was extremely dangerous. There was a lot of crime.
Travelers arriving at New York's Kennedy Airport today were handed pamphlets by off-duty police and firemen depicting New York as Fear City. In other words, a good place to stay away from.
But there was a great punk rock music scene and an underground film scene, and it was the place to be.
You could get, apartments in really scary neighborhoods, like the Lower East Side, and, so you get mugged a couple times, but at the same token, you don't have to think about paying rent, work maybe a couple days a week, and that paid for everything. So we had all this free time to work on what we really wanted to work on was our art.
There was an incredible amount of freedom, and you will trade your own safety for freedom.
$1. When I was still living in Kutztown, we would come in, and I remember the time it was pouring rain, and all of these hookers ran up to our car wearing raincoats, and then opened them up with nothing under them and like stuck it all in the windows of the car. And we were like, oh my God, we've got to move here.
It was absolutely full of bombs and drunks and fires.
Syringes. Basically, when you were sweeping, you'd sweep syringes off the sidewalk. That was the Lower East Side. A lot of syringes, broken syringes. We didn't have Whole Foods there on the corner like there is now.
Tribute to Gloria Vanderbilt, take 1.
I was in school full-time with a purpose and in this new environment and was just working. It was all new to me and it was all very exciting. And
you were 20?
And I was 20, yeah. I sort of met some people very quickly. Like in my drawing class, I immediately gravitated to this one girl who was named Samantha McEwen.
And he literally sat down, right, I mean, opposite me, but our knees touching, and he just went, "Can I draw you?" And that was Keith.
I had this idea that the students I was going to meet were going to be really special. So as soon as I got there, I was a little disappointed right away because I felt all the kids I met just seemed the same as the suburban ones that I had known. I was in the hallway and I heard Devo music, and there's Keith painting himself into a corner with these black strokes, and every stroke was to every beat of the music. And he had painted the entire room, and he was at the very end, and he was standing in the corner, and he was marking his mark, and I was like, wow. I said, this is the reason why I came to New York. We just started talking, and we hit it off, and I'll never forget, that moment.
I think Keith kind of like ruled that school from the time he got there.
I was already starting to sort of step on some toes. I would sometimes take the drawings and hang them up just in the hallways. Sometimes they'd stay there. One time they got taken down and torn up and left this. And so what I did was I took the drawing and hung it back up with the torn pieces and said, it looked better even like that. I mean, I was making a thing, so I wanted to show them.
He was self-promoting. He had made his Xeroxes, he was handing them out, and his buttons, and people were like, you can't do that. That's not what artists do.
I met him in the corridor. This really tall, lanky guy, and he looked like a mix between Fred Astaire with Jerry Lewis a little bit, He did put his stuff everywhere that he went in school. There was a Keith something all the time, you know what I mean? Which is funny. I remember one time on the stairs, he had put one drawing on each part, so you went up and you kept on seeing those things going up. That kind of thing annoyed people.
I didn't attribute it to raw ambition. I mean, he obviously had a lot of stuff inside of him. I'm not sure if he said this. Some people have a lot, I think maybe it was John Lennon. A lot of people have things inside of them that they can't get out. But I mean, in the case of Keith, he found a channel.
I really liked the video class a lot. Looking at yourself from outside of yourself was an incredible psychological sort of lesson for me.
Some of the stuff was actually shot down in Kutztown. He'd videotape his mom in the kitchen.
Will you please stop?
And then take that and splice it into, kind of dirtier stuff that they were doing in New York.
I was looking for my Tupperware book.
By this time, my friend Drew Straub decided that he was going to leave Kutztown. We decided to get an apartment together and move to the East Village.
We lived in a tiny apartment on the 3rd or 4th floor, huge roaches and plywood floors. Keith's room was virtually a closet, and it had like a phonograph, and he ended up playing like Rock Lobster like 20 hours in a row while he would be drawing in the apartment.
We were at a party. The beer load fell in the day. Someone reached in and grabbed it. Was a Rock Lobster.
And I was living, by coincidence, I promise, directly across the street from the club baths.
By the way, see, a few people cruise you around here, and I really can't blame them. That doesn't get you uptight, does it?
I was living in the middle of the West Village, in the middle of everything that was going on. And you couldn't go to the post office or the grocery store without cruising or without being cruised or without being totally aware of sex somehow.
New York in 1978 was one big orgy. There wasn't a lot of bad things that could happen if you just went crazy and explored every facet that you ever dreamed of without having your old friends or your family or anyone watching.
Our best friends were Kenny Scharf and John Sex. And, you know, Kenny Scharf says he had slept with everyone in the room, and John Sex pretty much got his name that way too. And then Keith and I were along for that ride also, every permutation. But I was never, Keith and I were never attracted to each other, so that never occurred.
I discovered backroom bars with people sort of anonymously having sex with whoever was there at the time, which became a way of life for for a long time. And because I was obsessed with sex, there were all these drawings of of dicks. I mean, tons of drawings of dicks.
He did penis wallpaper for our kitchen. It looks like butterflies, but it's actually penises.
At school, I was studying semiotics.
Ow. Ow.
Looking at language and picking it apart and deciphering and how meaning attached itself to things.
For it isn't man, but the world that has become abnormal.
One of our first days in the city, we ran into this thing called the Nova Convention, which was a sort of festival celebrating William Burroughs. It was about semiotics and words, and then it was about cut-ups. It was about cutting up text and putting it back together for new meanings. And Keith got that.
Lick. Sin. No. Art. Sin.
So I started spending more time trying to dissect language and play with language. I found a stack of letters that were printed on sort of this glossy paper, one letter on each page. And for whatever reason, there were 13 letters in this stack, so it wasn't an entire alphabet. Took them to my apartment and started to rearrange them to make whatever words I could out of these 13 letters. Came up with phrases which became sort of the basis for this whole work, which were art, boy, sin, as if no, if no, art.
No fat if no art, art if lick, lick fat boys, lick fat boys, lick fat boys, lick fat.
No one in the East Village had a television set. We went out every night. That was our entertainment.
At nighttime, I'm becoming part of the nightclub scene and then begin to become part of this scene at Club 57, the Polish church. In the basement of the church, there was a social hall.
I wanna see you tonight. I want you to walk in the door.
We were really kind of bored with the art world as an elitist place. It seemed like it was trying harder and harder to be more and more esoteric and not want to include the public at large. Club 57, Keith and I actually discovered together. We saw this door open, we like, what's in there? We go in there, and there's a jukebox, and we look, and the music was really fun. It was like Motown, 60s go-go music. Put the quarter in, and all of a sudden, Ann Magnuson comes out from behind the bar, and we're all go-go dancing together. And it was just like instant family.
Club 57 was our way of going to Hollywood without having to go to Hollywood. That whole spirit of DIY, we're not going to be uptown groveling at the feet of corporate entities for their approval to do anything, where we can find another playground.
You arrive in New York City and you just create who you want to be, which was why everybody was so amazing to be around.
Everything I say is red.
There was art shows. We were dying to get discovered. We all wanted the stream of fame and all this stuff. No one really was paying attention to what we were doing except for each other.
We had a vaudeville act called Acts of Live Art. I remember Keith bringing his television set and doing repetitive Art Boy Sin, Lick Fat Boys. Keith was already being like a serious artist, even though it was kind of deadpan and hilarious at the same time. Like people who saw that didn't go over real big. It wasn't fun enough for Club 57.
What I'm obsessed with at this time is trying to figure out why I'm an artist, and if I'm an artist, why I'm an artist. And also becoming aware of and very interested in what's happening on the streets of New York, and fascinated by the graffiti that I was seeing. Not only big paintings on the outsides of cars, but the incredible calligraphy, which was covering the insides of cars.
It was to compete with advertising in a certain regard. Like all these companies were just forcing their products in your face all the time. It's like we wanted to force ourselves in people's faces.
I started to notice him in my neighborhood in the Lower East Side, because he started to come down to get more acquainted with the graffiti writers.
I felt immediately an affinity to the work, as if I had, known it a long time. And this incredible pop cartoon sensibility from kids that had grown up watching cartoons with Technicolor. The forms seemed very similar in a way to the kind of drawings that I was doing, even though I wasn't making letters. They had the same kind of voluminous, aggressively fluid lines, which were obviously, done really directly with very little hesitation, but just really, really strong.
He was just so fascinated by the sense of the energy that these young individuals had. And I think Keith was very, just drawn to that. It was a magnet for him.
He discovered Puerto Rican boys and black boys, I guess. That was kind of my penchant too at that point.
From the time I was a kid, I had this tremendous guilt about all the things that white people had done. From fucking over the Indians to the whole civil rights movement. And I felt a much closer affinity to culture and people of color than I did to white culture in a way.
Disenfranchised youth creating really beautiful, urgent messages of self-identity. Way before Instagram, I like to call it Instadam, because Instadam was like, damn, look at that.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
When Ronald Reagan was elected president, everybody was shocked. Then we were all completely convinced that Reagan was going to start a nuclear war with Russia.
Even
must remain constant in preserving the nuclear deterrent and maintaining a solid capability for flexible response.
So why not just keep creating and making art and live for the moment, because the moment may not last much longer.
Current technology has attained a level of sophistication where it's reasonable for us to begin this effort. Religion and morality are indispensable supports.
He was saying these absurd things, you know, that Vietnam, the only mistake we made was not winning. And so I made these headlines, many of which were about Reagan, cutting up headlines from the New York Post and rearranging them to create new news. One of them was Reagan slain by hero cop. Another one was Pope killed for freed hostage. This was during the time of the Iran hostage crisis. The famed Times Square show, organized by collaborative projects, was the first time that the art world acknowledged that this underground existed.
The art world is very unpenetrable at that time. The velvet ropes are there, and you don't want just anyone crashing those velvet ropes.
The Times Square extravaganza on 41st Street.
There was starting to be this whole movement in New York of people trying to do things outside of the regular gallery system.
Collaboratively, Collab gave a platform for artists to come and either be whack or be all that.
I had done an installation of the Xeroxes of these letters of the Art Sin Boy piece, and there were reviews in Art Forum and Village Voice, and there was a few graffiti artists that had been invited to do things inside, one of which was Lee, who was one of the king of graffiti artists at that time.
It was an old, I didn't know it was an old massage parlor, AKA, as we used to call it back in the day, whore house. 4 floors, staircases that were practically falling apart. It was crazy. It was pretty wild.
I showed some paintings, like 2 or 3 paintings that I installed, and then Lee Quinones and I did a painting on the front of the building, a Fab 5 piece, which we spray painted. Keith was a big fan of graffiti. He was watching trains, looking at tags and things like that. He was very curious, and it was really great to see that he connected in that spirit of graffiti. He would see an interesting name, a way it was written. He had good questions, I had some answers, and we just became fast friends, like right away.
It was really a moment where the uptown culture of graffiti and rap kind of collided with the punk new wave aesthetic. So that was around the time when Keith kind of went, bing, I'm gonna do this.
A few days or a few weeks right after the Times Square show, I just started doing these new flying saucers and these animal figures, which sort of looked like they could have been cows or sheep or something, but they had very sort of square noses. So they were animals, but it was like symbol for animal. And human figures that were having sex. All these sort of scenarios that just unfolded in these drawings. They're really roughly drawn, because I hadn't done anything figurative in a really long time. And out of these were sort of really born the entire vocabulary that came afterward. And all of a sudden it just totally dawned on me, like, what am I doing in school? And I had discovered my own work. So I decided I was gonna have a show.
The solo show in New York City at PS 122, I went over there, and I think Keith was there on his own, and it was absolutely spellbinding. I mean, it was really, chills went down your spine.
In the space at PS 122, now the ceilings and walls have been covered completely with drawings, and I had been given this space only for, I think, a 1-month period.
It became a buzz, and everybody wanted to go and see what was that, Everybody wanted to go see it.
And I think that was around the time when Keith brought Tony to see this work.
How's that?
Too tight. I can't turn. Move here. Yeah, there's nothing going to...
Tony is a very forceful personality.
I've done shows with Picasso, Bacon, everybody, and I'm like there like a dead rat. I know my crap, please. I know the editors of Vogue. I know every fucking photographer there's in the world. So David Bailey, I fucking know from 1962, for God's sake. Do any of this mean anything to you?
This is the guy that literally went into the Museum of Modern Art with a spray paint can and painted Kill Lies All on the most famous Picasso in the world.
Why did you mark up that painting like that?
To tell the truth.
To tell the truth?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means you have to kill all the myths of art, to tell the truth.
Everyone's like, oh, he's the guy who defaced Guernica and he's an art dealer?
I would go to Museum Art just primarily to look at Guernica. However, the fact that he believed in protest against war and was committed enough to stand up to what he knew would be incredible attacks from the art world, I respected that.
We went to see the Keith Haring show, and the animated line was so original, so active, that immediately caught your attention. It didn't look school-trained. It didn't look qualified.
Tony was one of the first ones to see that it was worth money, was really going to be worth money.
I caught myself when I would do a double take, and I thought to myself, if there's something making me double take, there must be something to it, so I grabbed that.
The other thing that was happening was that I had started to draw graffiti for the first time on the streets with marker. And I started drawing the animal, which more and more looked like a dog and kept getting referred to as a dog. And the person crawling on all fours, which then, the more I drew it and the more the proportion of the head got bigger, the more it got referred to as the baby.
Amongst the graffiti community, placement was a significant thing. And he would place them in unique places, and there was this little crawling baby. And I was like, yo, yeah, that's dope, that's dope. And then he would just get a quick way of doing it.
One day, I enter the subway and see an empty black panel, which has been put there to cover an old advertisement. Immediately, I knew that I had to draw on top of this panel. I mean, it was like a waiting, perfect surface. I knew that I had to go above ground and buy chalk.
Keith was not sure about using spray paint. He was very sensitive, being white. He didn't want to be this white guy coming into a graffiti space that was largely people of color. He wanted to be a part of it, but in his own unique way.
The deficit in the city and the lack of advertisements, maybe at that time, made for a lot of vacancies on those blackboards.
After the first one, I started seeing them everywhere. And within days, I knew what I had discovered here. I could go back down in the subway, a week later and the drawing would still be there.
The crawling baby, the dog, flying pyramids, computers, televisions, dancing man, and then every sort of permutation of those sort of things, turning them into his own vocabulary.
Within a week, people would come up to me. I saw this other drawing. I saw the drawing. You're the guy that did the drawing. Blah, blah, blah.
Keith went at it like a bomb. It wasn't like he just went to one subway station and did a couple of chalk drawings. He kind of went throughout the entire city looking for black paper that didn't have the ads on.
He would do over 100 sometimes, say in one day. It would be enormously exhausting. To take the train, jump out and do one, another one, another one, another one, go to the next station, all the way to Harlem, all the way back. I mean, you'd just be dead.
You had to create a lot of work to be seen in a sea of 10,000 subway trains. Whereas a train goes by, and you're like, whoa, what was that? And it's a blur of color. But here you got the opportunity to have an arrested audience, and they're like, this is a phenomenon, what's going on?
he presented his work. And then you would be interested in what anybody would say about it.
Holding hands. For everybody, I guess. I mean, I don't get paid to do it, but I do it down here so lots of people can see it.
Keith had an inherent need to have a dialogue with people.
80–90% or more of the people using the subways would never go to Museum of Modern Art, would never go to a museum in life. So him, this was a museum.
And he knew what he was doing, for crying out loud. He was sending a photographer around to every place he did the drawing to photograph every drawing.
I had met the photographer, Huang Chi, standing on a street corner because he was just so eccentric and absurd looking that I knew I had to meet this person. And she almost immediately saw the potential of what was beginning to happen here and volunteered to start photographing them.
All of a sudden in Times Square, on the main luminescent display, there was Keith animation of his figures now on the middle of Times Square.
What did you guys think when you saw that?
We all, yay! Keith, that was great, yeah.
Apart from anything else, I think it was one thing that he felt his parents would definitely appreciate. You know, that is impressive.
I watched it happen for him super fast, which was, I was super happy for him and super excited. And at the same time, I'm human. I was like, shit, what about me, everybody?
I had made, with my own money, 20,000 posters to give away at this anti-nuclear rally. And it was huge, hundreds of thousands of people.
He decided with a bunch of his young friends to roll them up with a rubber band and give them away. Rubber band, give them away. I mean, all day long.
We all wanted to be in, like, important art galleries and be taken serious. But Keith had a particular goal beyond that. He wanted to be seen as a political activist in his paintings.
I was now at a point where I was realizing the potential of images and how much power they have to speak almost as a language. I moved in with Samantha, who is Kenny's girlfriend, but we've become really good friends by this point. She has found an apartment on Broome Street. At this point, I meet Juan Dubose at St. Mark's Baths and have great sex and just decide that this is the right person. I mean, he's black, he's really thin, his dick is the same size as me. We decide that he should move in, and we buy a tent because Samantha has got to walk through our room to get to the bathroom. So we have this huge indoor tent so that we have privacy. And also what is starting to happen for the first time, people are starting to be interested in buying the work. They come to the apartment and start to buy things. This man from London comes to the studio and buys a group of about 10 drawings. I mean, it's the first time that I've got over $1,000 in my hand. And for the first time in my life, realizing that I can live off of being an artist.
I was sitting at the kitchen table when he came in. I don't know if I was having lunch or what, and all of a sudden he reached in his pocket and he took out some $100 bills and laid them on the table. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Mom, I'm making money on my art." And I said, "Well, don't you need it? I know it's expensive to live in the city and you need to buy things and you need supplies." He said, "I'm doing pretty good, Mom. And I want to start repaying you for all you've given me over the years." That's when I realized that some of the people do like his art.
What happened was, up until that moment, it was like all for one, all for art. And then all of a sudden there was like, oh, wait a second, someone's making money? I'm gonna get left behind. It was always competitive, but in a fun way. And then all of a sudden it became a different kind of competition.
I'm starting to have dealers sort of fight over me, collectors are asking to come to the apartment, and then they want to haggle over prices, or they're people that you don't even want to talk to them to begin with because they're sort of creepier and creepier. Already they're trying to rip me off for whatever they can. It's too distracting from doing the work, which is what I really want to do. Tony is in the process of trying to open a gallery, and so I decided that I was going to go with Tony.
At that time, I really told him, Keith, I mean, think of doing something that would last, you know, like maybe paintings or something. Oh, no, I'm not going to be an old-fashioned painter. It's not about that. I said, you go and find a way that could be new. So he did. He left, and he came back a day later, super excited, ran. He said, I found something. I said, you know the trucks, the way they cover a truck with tarpaulin so the thing that wouldn't fly away? Yeah. He said, well, what about that? I said, great.
I ordered a special tarpaulin that was 13 feet square that would fit exactly in between the two doorways at Shafrazi. I was working probably obsessively, constantly, every day. We covered the floor to ceiling with drawings. CBS News has asked to do a little story for the evening news with Dan Rather.
I think it's more important to make a lot of different things and keep coming up with new images and things that were never made before than to do one thing and do it well. They come out fast, but I mean, it's a fast world.
Everything was organized, everything fitted together, and the basement became all black light. So all the paintings had day-glow green and red, and it glowed at night like psychedelia. You never saw that before.
When he had a show, we went and...
There weren't many there that were dressed like us or that were as quiet as us or didn't understand what was going on. But there
we were
some
definitely
others.
the oldest there, probably.
Yeah.
We weren't there too long.
No.
There was every type of person. People would never go to an art gallery opening. They were there.
We got homies from the streets, Lower East Side, Black and Puerto Rican people partying. You know, it was a different world. So when those white folks that just went to the regular art world things would show up, they'd be like blown away.
Beautiful. I can't get over it.
From the South, I'm a Southern painter. Mom.
Thank you.
Haring has become a hot property. They ooh and they ah.
Downstairs is unbelievable. I want to buy a few of these little wooden things.
And they pay plenty. Within the first few days of the show, about $250,000 worth of his pieces sold. Not bad for a 24-year-old kid from Kutztown.
Literally, it was packed. No one had ever seen an art opening in the established art world like this.
We had breakdancers. And of course, I'm constantly picking up beer bottles and mess everywhere. I mean, non-stop. At 6 in the morning, the music is blasting away and they're all drinking and smoking. And of course, I see downstairs, somebody had fallen downstairs, blood. Somebody's skull had cracked open.
All of a sudden, we were like, oh, we're big boys now. We're like in the big boys world, and we started making big boy paintings.
When the great Wall Street bull market began in 1982, it was one of the markers of New York being different, of New York having a kind of manic self-confidence. Just this sense of, it's okay to make money. In fact, it's okay to mainly think about making money.
By the way, it wasn't actually that cool to sell stuff in the 70s. It was like thought as being a little bit uncool.
There was a generation in art world, first of all, that was supposed to be aloof from all those things, that suddenly young folks are diving in head first, awash in dollars. There was a big party going on, and it was studded with famous people and the wannabe famous. And then bona fide stars like Keith.
There are starting to be offers for exhibitions all over the world.
Dividiu seus dias em São Paulo entre a Bienal e uma...
The demand for the work and the way that I was working and the whole sort of graffiti performance aspect made it possible for this whirlwind tour now of going from place to place.
Keith was an amazing person to watch paint. I did it many times.
People were very charmed by him because he was such a young spirit and he was so American. He really represented something that, you know, this youthful spirit and energy and the sneakers and the jeans and the being gay and hanging out and going to clubs.
Keith Haring is New Yorker en schilder en ook een beetje slachtoffer van the American Dream.
He really was treated like he was a rock star. On a trip that I happened to go with him on to Japan, all these stewardesses, flight attendants, from Japan Airlines came chasing him with roses in their hand, calling his name. You know, I mean, go figure.
He didn't do a lot of pre-planning on his things. He just did them.
So Keith had music going mostly all the time. Juan would make all these great mixtapes for Keith. Music was a big, big part of his life. A source of inspiration and I don't know, I mean, when you look at Keith's work, it moves.
Sometime right in this time, I begin for the first time to go to Paradise Garage. I may have never been the same since.
At that point, we were going to the Paradise Garage, which was a big gay disco on the West Side with the greatest sound system ever known to man.
It was so hot inside just from dancing that people were, you know, only wearing shorts and little outfits and things and sweating, and the music was phenomenal.
We went every Saturday, and there was no alcohol served at this club. So everyone was on drugs. It was 3,000 black people on drugs with Keith and I, and a few others, but it was mostly a black club.
Many people are on hallucinogenic drugs, this sort of communal, elevated spiritual experience.
We smoked pot like cigarettes, and that's not counting the mescaline and the acid and the psilocybin mushrooms. And the part that they never play up enough in like the Keith Haring story is the drugs. I always think that a lot of Keith's vibrations around everything that he drew was kind of psychedelic.
On the corner of Houston Street and the Bowery, where many derelicts and bums hang out, I walk past this wall almost every day on my way to go to the studio.
I wasn't proclaiming it, but people were saying the Hamburg walls all belong to Lee in New York. So he, out of respect and out of the generosity and out of just the sweetness that he had as a person, asked me, Lee, can I have permission to paint that wall? I was like, hey, Keith, I don't want to paint it because it has a crack in it.
He probably spent a couple hours cleaning all the garbage. There's just piles of garbage everywhere.
It was a funky, horrible wall. It was disgusting piece of garbage. I remember we go there to, can you help? I was like, oh yeah, I'll come later to help you, you know, forget it. It was the worst, crappy thing.
He just got a ladder and paint, and as Keith did, you don't ask permission, you just do it.
When I do this mural in 2 days or something, do this amazing, incredible wall that, I mean, it's glowing. The fluorescent paint is so bright, and the sun hits this wall, and it's just this incredible sort of monolith standing on the thing.
It was outrageous how powerful it was.
That was a real statement because he was far enough along in his career that people would know who he was. He had done enough of it that he had a vocabulary that he could work with.
I was formally introduced to this painting here yesterday when the brother painted it. We love it because he's all right with us. But we're gonna drink that wine and wash some windows and keep right on painting. Keep it up and don't erupt. Don't stop. The Chocolate Crew and the gang.
Once Basquiat stopped doing work on the street, you couldn't see his work anywhere except either in a museum or in a gallery. Keith kept and continued to make his work accessible at all times.
I've alienated, I suppose, some people by my meteoric rise to fame, and there is resentment among other artists that feel that I've sold out now. And there was an article that had come out that said that I still hadn't sold anything over $10,000, and so someone had written in huge letters across the whole painting, $9,999. So it was too much to fix up, and it was really too obnoxious, and so I went and by myself painted the entire thing silver and destroyed it.
From painting vacant ad spaces in subways to being flown around the world is quite a leap.
I went to Australia to do several projects. The National Gallery of Victoria was a huge building with a glass front on it. I was going to do a painting on this wall. It turned into this major controversy and even being on the front page because people there were seeing it as Aboriginal. But I was doing what I had been doing in New York and in America and all over the world. It just coincidentally was the same kind of line drawing as Aboriginals. Well, the final result was that about a month after I had left, the center panel ended up getting a shot put through it, and so the whole thing had to be removed. In London, I painted Bill T. Jones, and painting him every inch of his body, from head to toe to the tip of his foreskin, and then photographed him in all these sort of poses.
I never felt exploited by Keith. What was an article in Rolling Stone magazine talking about his Bwana syndrome. Who is this white guy surrounded by all these brown people, you know? He was an innocent.
Coming from a white family somewhere in Pennsylvania, you don't grow up in the same horrible sort of tenement housing that kids that grew up, in the Bronx or whatever grew up in. So when you try to assimilate into that culture, you may run into criticism for trying to glorify it for your own gain, personal gain. But in fact, it wasn't never true. He was empathetic.
At this point, I've made a sufficient amount of money, which I have a sufficient amount of guilt about and want to sort of share with my friends. For my birthday, I do my very first party of life.
There was nobody that didn't know who he was. I mean, he became New York.
The party of life is done for the occasion of my birthday, but not on my birthday. And it became the most coveted invitation in New York.
May 16th, Paradise Garage, 1984. And this is one of those handkerchiefs like the gay boys like to wear in their back pockets. Keith's parties were so exuberant. People were young, healthy, alive, fantastic bodies. It was like something you might imagine, ancient ritual where they've already pulled the heart out of the slaves, and then now the sun has come up and it's coming through Stonehenge just perfectly, and now we're going to celebrate. It was very pagan, and Keith just embodied that.
We were inviting just really gorgeous people to this party. From street kids to Calvin Klein. Anyone who was anyone at that time in New York had found a way to get an invitation to this party. Diana Ross showed up, which the garage was the ultimate highlight. And I had just painted a jacket for Madonna, and I've asked her if she'll sing there, and she agrees that she'll sing there.
They didn't take to Madonna. It's like, who is this trashy white girl that can't sing?
And we said, she doesn't have a great voice, but anything. He said, Andy says she's going to be the biggest thing. And we said, oh, sure, sure. Well, Andy was right.
The parties got bigger and more extravagant and wilder, and the invitations remained clever. Oh, this was at the Palladium.
Huge mob scenes outside. I mean, almost practically closed the traffic on 14th Street and people having trouble getting in. There was just as big a mob at the back door, people passing out outside. I mean, the whole thing was, again, an incredible event.
He became very big and he became very starstruck because he was a kid from Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
I mean, I'm in newspapers all across America the next day with Brooke Shields at my party.
Who sings Happy Birthday?
Boy George.
I think he became really into it really quick.
He got well known, and then he got around Andy, and then everyone started having one name that was around Keith. It was, you know, Brooke and Andy and Grace, Yoko and Michael.
We were in the kitchen, and I think it was me, Keith, Juan, and someone else, and the phone rang, and Juan picked it up, and he went, oh, okay, and he handed it over to Keith, and Keith said, who is it? And Juan went, it's Michael. Keith went, it's Michael, and Juan went, it's Michael. So he went, hi, and he sort of got the phone, and he sort of went, what's up?
Having his stuff taken seriously by the art world was one thing, but getting to hobnob with everybody on Hollywood Squares was like a whole another level of fame that he really relished.
And the conversation goes on for not very long. And then he goes, oh my God, and it's Kenny ringing him, pretending to be Michael Jackson. It's so funny. So Keith was just like absolutely livid, slammed the phone down.
All of a sudden, he went from being this kid from Kutztown to hanging out with Farrah Fawcett.
Juan was my lover during this time, but I was having more opportunity, and especially with more traveling, more notoriety, and more boys around me all the time. I was already starting to become less and less true to Juan, really, and it was hard because I was constantly surrounded by temptation. And then I meet Juan Rivera.
There are some people who felt that, you know, once he got famous, he abandoned them.
He'd get upset when people didn't come to his parties. He was like, what? Brooke Shields not showing up? And I remember my wife and I would be like, oh, why do you care about Brooke Shields? We're here.
We kept being friends the whole time, but however, I mean, certain things, we cannot take the Concorde, most of the people, every weekend to go to Paris, you know? So it makes a difference. You have a different lifestyle, that's all.
He was not really a fashion plate, but he had a tuxedo with cummerbund. He always looked a little like he was wearing his father's clothes.
He was never trying to be something that he wasn't. He was amazed that what he was around this.
There was something about Andy's sense of art as a business that really appealed to Keith, and which, you know, had that philosophy did play a role in Keith's decision to open the pop shop.
They call us the Pop Shop. From T-shirts to posters, pins and pendants to watches. It's the place to pick up, well, just about anything from pop art sensation Keith Haring.
So the pop shop was a reaction to, you can only have my work if you have thousands of dollars.
One of the great things about the image is that it can be transferred into any medium. It doesn't matter whether the image is reduced to 1 inch by 1 inch, it'll still hold up. I mean, it's definitely art for the age of the mechanical reproduction.
It was, you can buy a t-shirt and be part of what I'm doing.
I knew that I was going to get a lot of criticism for it, but I also knew that it was the thing that the work was calling for and that it had to become.
I never made money, lost money. Never made money.
The pop shop never made money?
Never made money. I lost money.
What was the point of it then?
So everybody could have art. Everybody could be enjoying something.
But what happened was Keith was accused of selling out.
Do you think the pop shop will in any way interfere with Keith Haring, the artist?
I mean, to me, it's all one and the same thing. I mean, to me, the pop shop is part of Keith Haring, the artist.
I co-founded Spy magazine. And in the first issue, it was a 2-page essay, downhill from here. Here was Keith Haring at the, I don't know if it was the pinnacle of his success. You know, the implication is that you don't have enough worth, talent, whatever, to continue this. You've gone about as far, and mighty far it is, on talent that may not be protean.
He was not somebody who said, oh, never mind, I'm not going to read those reviews, they don't matter. He read everything, and, you know, it upset him.
Things have seriously changed already in New York because of this new horror of AIDS. And little by little, it's building up in the news, calling this thing like gay cancer. And people around me started to get sick. The first person that I knew that died of AIDS was Klaus Nomi, who had been around from Club 57 days.
Doctors are puzzled by the first cases of a highly unusual breakdown of the body's immune system.
You would be with your friend, vivacious, cherubic 20-year-old, and then you would not see them for a couple weeks and you run into them in the street and it would be like, what the fuck? You know, all of a sudden they look like a skeleton and it would happen that fast.
It starts out as a small purple lesion similar to a bruise or insect bite. It's called Kaposi's sarcoma and is now on a deadly upsurge among gay men.
At that point, if you got a bruise, you thought you had KS. You thought you were going to die as a gay man. And then there was the stigma and the shame. It was so shameful, AIDS, at that point.
As the rate of new cases rises sharply, mounting evidence focuses the search on sexual and blood transmissions.
There were doctors who were so frightened that they wouldn't even let patients in their office. They just would send them down to my office to see them.
It was like this underlying, when is it going to rear its head and who is next? It's just the way that we had to live life at that time.
We got very myopic about creating, doing things and doing things and doing things, I think in a lot of ways to avoid the trauma of seeing friends die right and left.
End of the day, I would go home, and as often as not, I would come back the next day, and there would be like 4 new paintings and 20 drawings. I was like, okay. He was so prolific that it was just sort of hard to fathom.
The idea of going down in those subways and really doing the public stuff, when you obviously didn't need to, was even more important for me to do it.
The more well-known Keith became, the more that was demanded of him. And, you know, when I say that I often had to say no, it's usually because he said yes to everything. You know, he was drawing a logo for somebody, or there was a show coming up and he needed to create some works on paper.
I painted Grace Jones for 2 live performances. And I went to Marseille in France to paint a backdrop for Roland Petit ballet. Did some graphics for some hard pills in Germany. Designed 4 watches for Swatch. Every trip coordinated exactly to leave after a Saturday night at Paradise Garage so that I don't miss any of my garage time.
Haring got plenty of publicity, and West German television pictures of him working were seen in East Germany.
He loved the performative quality of some of his work because he could create in front of an audience. He loved people. He loved children because they're innocent, they're pure.
You know, Keith throughout his life found that
openness, appealing about children and appealing about working with children.
Don't let your brush sit inside the cup, because it can get knocked over.
City Kids brought the teenagers to the project, but Keith Haring, an artist known for his work with graffiti, brought the inspiration. It takes quite a lot to organize a paint job by 1,000 teenagers from all over New York.
The buses just kept unloading, coming from all 5 boroughs in New York City, bringing kids from everywhere. I had never really been out of Brooklyn. I didn't know people from Queens. I didn't know people from the Bronx. When you come from poverty, sometimes you think that that's all there is. Every single person that you see represented on this banner had a voice. But somebody feeling like your statement was important at 16, that changed everything.
There was this thing that children were comfortable with me and I was comfortable with them.
If you're not sure, you come to me and ask me, should they be painting with red or green here?
I knew that they can sort of sense honesty in the drawing.
Without her, there'd be no me, no you, no liberty. Keon. That was my statement, 1986. I told you I couldn't draw. We got to see life different, and it gave you the opportunity to go, hey, there's more to life than just my everyday. Let's see what else is out here. Let's see what else we can do. I got invited by Keith Haring to go up. He was doing a mural in Harlem, so now it's this world famous, the crack is whack mural, right? It was a nice, like, sunny summer afternoon day. All I can remember is, this is taking forever. I think this is whack.
It's a sight you can't miss. If you live in the neighborhood or you pass 128th Street on the FDR Drive, you may have even wondered who did that and why. Graffiti artist Keith Haring did it.
86 was sort of the beginning of the crack scene sort of starting in New York. The whole thing was that it was quickly addictive. It's a really terrible addiction. It's much different than heroin addiction. Yeah, I've tried everything, you know.
When he would have been 27, Keith was showing regularly in galleries all over the world, and he had his first solo museum show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Bordeaux. And that show then would go on to the Stedelijk in Amsterdam. I mean, you know, these are major, major, major museums.
Keith was very hurt that during the period when he was having a lot of his one-man shows all around the world, that MoMA wasn't interested. It was like falling on deaf ears.
I still haven't had an exhibition in a museum in the United States of any kind of substance.
We were like, what the fuck's wrong with these American curators? How come they don't get it, you know? He was combated by critics for having a style that resembled illustration. You could say, yeah, but think about what he was illustrating. You know, all the belief systems were being challenged.
It upset him that people just didn't get it. They didn't get that he thought art was for everybody. They didn't get that he felt that art should be as accessible as possible.
During the summer, I started to notice trouble with my breathing. I was inspecting every day and waiting to see the purple splotch. And I found a spot on my leg. So I went to a doctor and found out that it was, in fact, KS. Meaning that now I fit exactly the classifications of actually having AIDS. Now it was going to happen to me, and now I had to deal with it.
Well, he had no delusions that he was going to be cured or that the disease was going to change or anything. He knew it was progressive. He knew he was dying. Most people were a little more histrionic, and he wasn't. He was very collected and very accepting, kind of matter-of-fact in dealing with it.
And we went over to the Lower East Side to the river and sat and cried and cried and cried. But then you can't just, it's like you have to go on. You like get yourself together and you realize that this is not the end right there, and that there's other things, and you've got to continue, and you've got to figure out how you're going to deal with it and confront it and face it.
He told us he was HIV positive. And at that time, we had gone through this with a lot of people. I mean, a lot. I guess in a way it almost felt inevitable.
He had corposes, and he used to go to the plastic surgeon. They remove the ones on the face and, the hands. And he wouldn't go in the water, and I say, oh, come on, let's go, who cares? Like, no, I have this thing. He's like, no, let's go. And then he took the T-shirt off, and we almost fainted because it's horrible, and it's very painful. You have to remember, very painful. It hurts like shit,
I started having more and more need to be with intellectual companionship to deal with the situation, because it really required talking about and trying to figure out exactly what was going on. I met this kid, Gil. Turns out that he's straight, but we still develop some kind of bond, and he sort of starts to become my intellectual companion.
So this photo, I was probably 18 years old. When I met Keith Haring, I was introduced to a world that I did not know existed. I knew after a while I was the typical quote-unquote Keith boy. For as much as he was attracted to me, he never, ever tried to pressure me in any way. Our relationship was more brotherly.
I haven't heard from Juan DuBose for a long time. His mother calls me and tells me that he died. Telling people that Juan died is, in a way, telling people that I'm going to die.
It was very sad. There was an open casket, but Keith is looking at it and saying, well, I'm next. Soon it'll be me there, And
I would drive him to, chemo and take him to doctors or hospitals and stuff in the evenings to do the things that he could do. Meanwhile, he's, making work and almost more aggressively than before.
He loved classical music in the end of his life. He listened to that all the time, very loud.
Once Keith got his diagnosis, he basically just ramped up everything. He just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. He created so much art. He traveled like crazy.
You could absolutely paper the wall with the to-do lists that he created on a daily basis, sometimes more than one a day. Just a checklist of all the things he had to accomplish, and I would imagine that 99% of those things were done.
Once he got the diagnosis, he pretty much put himself out there. He used his art to create attention and awareness.
Sexist, anti-gay, go away. Racist, sexist, anti-gay, go away.
If you don't have money in the city, you can't, it's an expensive disease. People that you can't get, money to get your ACT or to get whatever you have. You don't, people just give up.
When we discuss a huge action that would cost a lot of money, we get all excited about it, but we'd all worry, how are we going to pay for this thing? We always struggled raising money and rarely had more than $10,000 in the bank. And he would come up and he'd say, Peter, I really want to help with this action financially. Could you stop by my studio? I kind of have a cash business these days, and I'd walk from my East Village apartment down to Soho. He'd go off to his little knapsack thing that he'd have in the corner, and he'd come back to me and hand me this huge wad of cash. And it was almost invariable, it was always $10,000.
I mean, I have always been an incredibly energetic person, and the hardest thing for me is to slow down that process. Yeah, I believe that you live while you're living, and you live as fully and as completely as you can, and you deal with the future as it comes to you and as it's doled out to you.
You know, he certainly had some days that were very, very dark. And certainly, you know, if you look at the work that he created in those last couple of years, there's a great deal of darkness in them.
It became the hell and horror of it all. Like some of the last paintings he did were really like all the beauty is destroyed, all the happiness of it all is gone, and now it's just it's kind of like hell.
Fan mail is starting to pour in from this Rolling Stone article in which I have bared my entire life story. At this point, I hadn't even told my parents that I was sick yet.
There was hysteria and fear. So many people had it, yet nobody was coming out and talking about it, especially nobody famous. It was very brave of him to do that.
One of Keith's dear friends who lived in Kutztown still was having his child baptized soon after Keith's article came out in Rolling Stone. There were people who refused to come to church that day because Keith was there and they knew he had HIV.
The celebrity invites dried up immediately. It seemed overnight. He even remember mentioning it once that he just, the invitations just stopped. He wasn't invited anymore. It was hard to watch how he kind of learned that the vapidity of just celebrity for celebrity world.
I mean, there was some in the back of his mind, kind of like, you know, I'm sick, I don't know how long I'll be able to keep this up. But there was never any gloom. He was working and he was joyful that he could work, and it was joy.
Then I do a mural called Once Upon a Time, which is inside the bathrooms of the lesbian and gay community center on 13th Street.
I haven't seen this in 30 years. He didn't very often title things. He wanted to just bring home the message that, you know, once upon a time, it was not a death threat to engage in this kind of behavior. I don't know, it doesn't have a feeling of warning. And there's nothing in this mural about being sick. I remember Keith kind of being like cheeky, kind of like, you know, being mischievous, wanting to see what my reaction would be.
It's basically a love letter from a gay man to other gay men, reminding us of more innocent times in our lives.
Even in the state he was celebrating life up to the very end.
Coogee rapping polo. Back again.
In fact, he was celebrating it a bit too much. Like, I would say, Keith, I would rather think it's a good idea if you maybe ate healthy, had some of this carrot juice, instead of doing a line of Coke. And he'd be like, fuck that. No, I'm just gonna do this with the candle burning at both ends, bright, and not wait for anything.
You know, I never had any sort of delusions about living until I was going to be an old person. But there's works that I've created that are going to stay here forever. There's thousands of real people, not just museums and curators, that have been affected and inspired and taught by the work that I've done. So the work is going to live on long past when I'm going to be here.
I do solemnly swear and promise that I will faithfully perform the duties to the best of my abilities, so help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. Mayor.
Keith, in January of 1990, attended the inauguration of Mayor Dinkins in New York City, and the inauguration was held outside, and he contracted a very difficult chest cold.
It was just like Keith was the ever-ready bunny, and then the ever-ready battery just died.
He had such a wonderful group of very close friends who were coming in and out of that apartment. You know, it was like Grand Central Station some days.
He wasn't in there going, oh my God, my life sucks. It was almost like he was loving everyone. There was like so much, oh, fuck. He really loved his friends and all the people that were around him, and he really felt, I think he really appreciated that we were all so there for him.
So Kenny gave him a pad and a pen, and Keith tried to do the baby.
This is the last drawing by Keith. He struggled so bad. He really wanted to show that he could still do it. And it was really hard for everyone.
The nurse woke my parents to tell them that it was in the middle of the night. So his kidneys are failing, and that means there's not much time. And my parents got into bed with him and held him for the hours until he died.
These are some of Keith's designs with there you can see the baby.
They're a little bit flashy and on the loud side, so I don't wear them much. I'm not a flashy, loud guy.
There was times when he drew in the pictures. He did not sign his name, but he would draw a baby in the lower right-hand corner. He always said that the baby was a symbol of life.
So we move to the Keith Haring, and we start the bidding here at 3,200,000, 3,500,000, 3,800,000 already. At 3,800,000. $4 million, $4 million. Looking for 4.2, 4,200,000. $4,500,000, 4.7 I'll take for the Haring. At 4,700,000 and selling. At 4,700,000 for the Haring.